I'll be honest. Having been around Women Love Women fandom for some time now, I knew that Supercorp wasn't going to go canon. It was written plainly on the wall in spite of the narrative neon signs blinding us with their potential at every turn. And you know what? Although it's a travesty that they didn't end up together, I'm not even mad about it. If I've learned anything from Janeway 7, Swan Queen, Rizzles, and Faberry, it's that chemistry can be slapping the powers that be in the face, and they will fastidiously ignore it because we still live in a world where it is too radical for the lead character on a network TV show to be gay. It is a case of good old homophobia, but I imagine it was also tied up in fears around losing advertising dollars for the network because heteronormativity is seen as the default, and the powers that be were afraid that people who aren't gay won't be able to relate to a narrative that doesn't specifically cater to them or actively boycott them because outside of a few liberal microcosms, the world is still deeply homophobic. And you know what? They're possibly right, given how cisgendered straight white boys have spewed their venom at the Doctor regenerating into a woman, at Ghostbusters and Ocean's 8, with their all-female cast remake, just to name a few. Not that Supergirl was lacking in queer characters, it's just that it had clearly reached its quota with 2 gay women and a trans woman in the ensemble cast, and, much in the same way pop characters are still frequently relegated to second and third tier characters to satisfy racial diversity, so too are queer characters. The short of it is, Kara, as the lead of the superhero franchise on the CW network, simply couldn't be allowed to have a thing for the ladies. I guess the show wasn't banking on Katie McGrath and her ability to generate gay chemistry with a lamppost. Well, that's unfair. Kara and Kat had chemistry too, before Lena came along, and that is by no means where the Women Love Women subtext ships end on the show, but it was the most overt, solidified by very textual narrative devices and character arcs for both ladies. Was it intentional on behalf of the show to write an epic sapphic pairing? I honestly don't think so. At least to start. Initially, I imagined the reasoning behind making Lena such a central character was that once they introduced her and understood the immense potential of the character, they couldn't help but keep her on. It made sense to toe that line of whether Lena was ultimately a good or evil character given her family, capitalizing on the existing mythology around the Luthor name and their history with Superman. They then stepped up the stakes by keeping her unaware that Kara was Supergirl, which is why so much was made of Lena's fear of betrayal. With Lex and Lillian Luthor, the reoccurring bad guys on the show, the potential of Kara's betrayal to drive Lena to the dark side and back to her villainous family was quite simply too good a narrative to pass up. But in order for it to have resonance, it required Lena to occupy an important place in Kara's heart, and so they became very close. But boy, they sure walked straight into that one, didn't they? Because as platonic as it may have been intended, it came off super gay, from their lingering looks to the things they said to the absolute emotional devastation at their eventual fallout, to the point that Kara was willing to change time in order to fix their relationship, and that Lena almost went full-on evil because of how betrayed she felt. At what point did they realize what they were doing? Did the show try to turn Supercorp into something, but unlike She-Ra failed to get the buy-in needed to go canon? I don't know, but in typical style, strongly reminiscent of Once Upon a Time, they tried to pair them up with dudes. That didn't fly, and the fan backlash was swift. And to their credit, they did ultimately let our ladies end up single, and even though it came off as incredibly queerbaity, they were allowed speeches that reaffirmed how much they cared for each other in the last moments of the series, allowing them to end as the greatest of gal pals. To my mind, it was the next best thing to having them be together. But here is why, in spite of how slap-me-in-the-face obvious it was that they should end up as a couple, I honestly didn't mind that they didn't. Because the final season of Supergirl was bad. It was really bad. There are a few things I appreciated about how it ended, such as the Super Friends getting to stay together. The Alex and Kelly wedding was lovely, but the show was already in steep decline, and this final season put the nail in the coffin. I have never yelled at my screen so much. I understand Melissa Benoit had a baby, which required the writers to create a scenario to keep Kara off screen for chunks of time, but the execution of the first half of that last season, I think I dozed through most of it. What even happened? I don't know, except I found it incredibly dull. Then, once she was rescued, what appeared to be a great concept with Nixley and the totems was so badly conceptualized that it fell flatter than a pancake on its face over and over again for the remainder of the series. The mythology of the totems was poorly thought out and terribly executed, to the point where it felt like each episode was Groundhog's Day, with harebrained solutions that included supercharging Supergirl with the sun, which would drain the sun's power to the point where it would cause ecological collapse, but a second from completing the supercharge aborts and somehow the sun gets all the energy back. How does that even work? In between the muddled attempts to beat Nixley, we also got these endless array of grand speeches from one character to another, as though the show was desperately trying to shove its moralizing down our throats, telling us rather than showing us, all the while managing quite adeptly to leave crater-sized holes in the resolutions of a number of arcs, while spending far too much time with pointless characters like William and the most eye-roll worthy and unbelievable love, and I am using air quotes here, love story between Lex and Nixley. Meanwhile, Nia and Brainy sort of seemed to reunite in the only 2 episodes I enjoyed of the entire season, when they went back in time to get Kara's blood, only to jump to them living together some episodes later. Alex and Callie, with little screen time, are adopting a child, which was never discussed as a couple. It just kind of happened. Don't get me wrong, super cute and definitely a highlight of the season, but where was the lead up? And most importantly, after 4 seasons of building the arc around Kara and Lena, their resolution was bottomed out, sidelined. It went from some kind of tentative, we have a long way to go before we're okay, to just being okay. We see little of how they find their way back to each other, how they mend the hurt. Instead, Lena is suddenly a witch, which, given how little it played into resolving the finale, felt like a narratively pointless thing to do and a waste of screen time. She's endlessly more interesting to me as a woman of science rather than a witch who is so powerful that with no training she can just cast magic strong enough to fake a totem. The idea of her coming into her own power could have been done just as effectively through other satisfying ways. The only reason I can think of to give her powers was so that Kara could reveal her identity without fear of her friends and family dying, given how clearly it was spelt out that they would all die if she came out as recently as last season. Was that why? I'll stop there. There is just so much that was so poorly conceived and executed, so while I appreciate the Supercorp moments we got through the last season, it simply wasn't enough to make up for the show's egregious faults. Had Supercorp become endgame in the last moments of the series, as many had hoped it would, pulling a Korosami if you will, it would have honestly felt pretty hollow, because for as much as they kept giving us these very shippy moments, be it their interdependence of each other, the loaded looks between them, or each declaring how much they believed and cared for each other, we would have been robbed of the tension that came from them realizing that they had feelings and building up to a reveal. It was just kept south of main text, enough that people could reason the romantic vibe away. Which is why I'm not sad that Supercorp wasn't endgame. It would have, at least for me, have felt very underwhelming for Supergirl to have been that revolutionary show that we're hoping for, where a slow burn subtext ship finally breaches the waves of heteronormativity to sail boldly forward. I'll stick to Xena and Avalance, thanks. What are your thoughts on how Supercorp ended? Comment below. Until next time, lady lovers.